Hello and welcome to English 201. My name is Dr. MHohner and I'll be your instructor for the course. This is our first lesson we're going to go over. It's called Why and How to Be a Demanding Reader. So we'll spend this lecture mostly unpacking that term, demanding reader. What does that mean? As well as discussing why it's a good thing or important to become a demanding reader and how you go about doing it. And this is my theme for the class. So we'll also talk about why I've chosen it as a theme, and how it will be important and influential throughout the course. Each lecture will be divided into a few parts. So you'll have usually somewhere between 2 and 4, about 10 to 15 minute long videos that you can watch, explain all the concepts for the class and unpack what you've been reading to prepare you for the discussion board. This particular lesson, our first one, has 3 parts. So we're going to have just a very general introduction to the course, where we go over kind of the nuts and bolts of how to have success in a fully online asynchronous class like this one. Part 2 will be more specific to this specific class, even this specific section of 201. So what it means to be a demanding reader, why we should do it, how we should do it, and most importantly, why I've chosen this theme for the class. And finally, in part 3, we'll have an example of doing demanding reading, what I call a case study. I'll be modeling for you how to do demanding reading through my analysis of the short story, The Third Fourth Flat, which I assigned to you as part of your reading homework. So I'll demonstrate the skills I'm talking about in part 2, and hopefully that can serve as a launching off point, if you will, to let you hit the ground running doing that kind of work yourself with the various things we read in this course. So that's what we'll be talking about today. We're going to start with this, like I said, very general introduction to the course. This is what we call an asynchronous, fully online class, meaning we don't meet up, not in person, not on Zoom. So you have deadlines. Usually there's about 1 or 2 assignments per week, and that keeps it so you can do the assignments at your own pace, depending on if maybe you have a pretty intense working schedule or other obligations. You can fit the course in when you want to. And that is really helpful in a lot of ways, but it can also be challenging too. You have to be very cognizant of time management and deadlines and whatnot. So I'm going to just real quickly here go through some general tips and guidelines that should be helpful in any course like this before we get to the specifics of our course. So here are some, like I said, very general strategies for success with online learning. Manage your time well. So look ahead to what the due dates are, take note of them, mark them down on the calendar, or use the syllabus calendar that's in Canvas to keep track of those deadlines. Then think about your week and what you have to accomplish that week. Do you have a full-time job? Are you like me and you have children? And so you devote certain hours of the day to these other things. Figure out which hours you're going to devote to this class, and at the start of the class, devote more time than you think may be necessary. And then as you start to do the assignments and get a feel for how long they take, you can adjust accordingly. But always budget, more time than you'll think you'll need, so that way you make sure to get everything done, and be sure to block out those time slots on your calendar before the assignments are due, so you get them turned in on time. So this kind of course can be really helpful if you have a busy schedule, as long as you manage your time well. And so this is what I just described. Come up with a schedule where you reserve time to work on the class throughout the week. We have at least 1 assignment due per week, so you really need to make sure you reserve some time where you can work on this course. Stay up on the due dates and reading assignments and try to work ahead if possible. So like I said, take note of the due dates. Give yourself time to read. This is an English class, so there's a lot of reading. Make sure you budget enough time to do the reading fully and thoroughly. As you'll read when we talk about reading strategies, you may even want to reread things multiple times. And a lot of the things are short, so that's possible. But you've got to set aside time for it so you can read them fully and effectively. And you're always welcome to work ahead. I should have each lecture available at least 1 week before it's due, if not sooner, maybe even sooner. So, work ahead if you can. And you don't have to, but that certainly can be helpful when you have that flexibility with a class like this. Okay, so now we're going to get just a bit more specific with strategies for this class. So read carefully. The strategies I just discussed would apply to most online classes. For this class, we have a heavy amount of reading, and reading is a big part of the class, as you probably gathered, since one of the textbooks is called How to Read a Book. So this book, How to Read a Book, will give you strategies for reading effectively and critically in a demanding way. And so, reread things that are confusing, take notes as you read, mark up the margins. And we'll talk about more of these strategies as we move through the material. But know that reading is part of the class. You have to do it, and you can't just perhaps read it the way you would read anything else. One of the things Mortimer Adler talks about how to read a book is how there are different types of texts that are different levels of demanding. And so, for example, I read a lot of articles about NFL football on my phone. I don't necessarily employ the same reading strategies when I read those as I do things I read for a class I'm teaching, like this one. So you'll want to use reading strategies specific to great, challenging, demanding books like Hercule Poirot. And so some of these are reading slowly, rereading anything that doesn't make sense, reading the whole text multiple times, taking notes in the margin, trying to paraphrase what you've just read in your own words so you show your understanding. These are just a few of the strategies. Like I said, we'll talk about them in more detail as the course goes on. Similarly, watch the lectures carefully. So, that's on your time. So you can pause them, come back to them, certainly jot down notes during them, just like you do with your reading. A lot of times I'll pose questions. And so think of it almost like a live class where you could pause the lecture and try to answer the question before I answer it. So the idea with both the reading and the lectures is to be an engaged, critical thinker who's really engaged in thinking about what's being read or said and taking notes, engaging with it. And a lot of what I'm saying here comes from research that shows that writing something down is much more helpful to remembering it than reading, hearing, or seeing it is. So keep that pen busy, whether you're reading or watching a lecture, whatever you're doing, and you'll remember the information better than if you just kind of watch it or just kind of read it without taking notes. All right, so we're moving more specific as we go. So we had general tips for online classes, tips specific to this online class, and now we have the actual things I'm asking to do in each weekly lesson. Step 1 is do the reading. We talked about that. Step 2 is watch the lecture. And step 3 is answer the discussion board question or questions. Sometimes I might ask you to respond to multiple questions or just one, but either way, you always have to do at least one response to a classmate. So make sure you read the instructions for the discussion board thoroughly and carefully, and do just what it asks. I usually have word count requirements on there and other things to make sure you know exactly what you need to do. So we've talked about the reading in the lecture. Let's talk in a little bit more detail about what I expect on the discussion board. So when you answer a question I've posed to you, and it's your response to my question, those responses should be at least 250 words. They should answer the question fully, and they should use what we call close reading to defend the answer. We'll talk about close reading in a little more detail later on, but this is usually using a quote from the text or at least some evidence from the text. And now you can't just quote the quote and then move on. You have to explain how the quote supports or proves your answer. So you answer the question fully and directly. Sometimes they kind of have multiple parts, so that's why I say fully and directly. Don't get off topic. But once you have that full direct answer, then give either quote, paraphrase, some kind of evidence from the reading, and finally explain how that evidence from the reading supports your answer. So there's an answer, there's textual evidence, and then there's a connection between the textual evidence to prove your answer. Responses to classmates should be at least 150 words and advance the discussion in some way. So they don't have to be quite as long, but they can't just be like, yeah, good job, great job, I loved your post. This discussion board is supposed to simulate the action we miss by not being in a face-to-face classroom. So you want to create a conversation, a discussion with your classmates. So there's a lot of ways to do this. You can pose questions. You can kind of build on what they say, but in some way you have to be moving the discussion forward so that as more and more people talk to each other, more of a conversation unfolds, kind of mirroring what we would have in an actual classroom. I think posing questions to people is a great way to do this, but there are other strategies too. So posts have to be substantive and meet these requirements listed above. So I might use the language when I'm grading your work as substantive, which means that it's met. That's just kind of a word to say that it's met these requirements that I've described above. So you'll see how many points, each one is worth. And so you'll get full credit if it's substantive, you'll get partial credit if it's not substantive, and a 0 if it's missing. So usually I'll just say great job or something like that if it's substantive. If for some reason you don't get the full point, you just get half the points, then I'll explain specifically what's lacking so that you can improve for future discussion board posts. And obviously 0 points if you don't turn it in.